Hi there, let's crochet Hugo. First, grab your set and remove the lid. I'll actually use it to store the items I won't need. Here you've got the care instructions. Along with the yarn, set the smaller yarn skeins aside for the moment. You'll need the hook and the green yarn. In this little bag, you'll also find the stitch markers. You'll need those too. Set the stuffing aside. Now take the yarn and remove the label. Locate the yarn tail. Place the yarn ball inside the tin. This way the yarn will stay clean and unravel smoothly. It will also help you control the tension in the yarn. Okay, let's begin with the magic ring. I'll demonstrate a hands-only method, although there are plenty methods using a hook. Take the yarn holding the yarn tail in your right hand and the working yarn in your left hand. Now let's start with the base of the ring. Place the working yarn over the tail and pinch where they intersect. Now pull the working yarn out of the loop that we've just created. Give this new loop a twist to form a cross at the base, then pull the working yarn through this loop, tightening it until the knot is snug but not too tight. Pull on the working yarn to adjust the loop to fit the size of the hook. Now test the magic. Pull on the yarn tail, and if your ring tightens up, you've got it right. Adjust the ring to make sure it's not too big, and then put the yarn tail back inside the ring so that these two strands remain together. Grab the hook and slide it into the loop. To adjust the loop to fit the size of the hook, simply pull on the working yarn. The loop should be just the size of the tip of the hook so that it is easy to slide the hook through. Hold the yarn on your pinky and ring fingers and loop over the middle and pointer fingers. Secure the ring with your thumb. Make sure you've got tension in the working yarn and the magic ring. Now let's make 6 single stitches for row 1. Put the hook through the ring and grab the working yarn from underneath. Pull the hook out of the ring, forming another loop on the hook. That's about the same size as the previous one. Yarn over again, and this time twist the tip of the hook downwards to secure the yarn and pull it through both loops on the hook. Now you've made your first single stitch. We've got 5 more to do. Let's do another one. Put the hook into the ring and grab the working yarn from underneath. Pull the hook out of the ring to form a new loop on the hook. Grab the working yarn from underneath or yarn over and pull the working yarn through both loops on the hook. Check the size of the loop on the hook and follow along with 4 more single stitches. Once you're done with all 6 stitches, pull on the hook to make a larger loop, and this will save our last stitch from falling apart. Here you can see we've got our 6 stitches all lined up. Each stitch has the shape of a V. Now let's tighten the magic ring. Get the yarn tail out and pinch the last stitch in the ring. Pull on the yarn tail so that the ring tightens. Make sure not to over-tighten the ring so it is easier to crochet row 2. Leave a small hole in the middle of the ring. To count the stitches, gently pinch each stitch to make it easier to see. This is stitch number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The largest loop you've pulled out with the hook is not considered a stitch. Now let's find the second stitch again. This is the first one and the second one. Grab a stitch marker and slide it under the V of the second stitch. This is going to help us in the next round. So here's the first stitch and the second one. Grab another stitch marker and put it into the next V, so into the third stitch. Here is our row 1 with 6 single stitches. In round 2, we're going to have to make 6 increases. An increase is typically 2 single stitches made in the same stitch of the previous round. Increases are used to shape our project, and in our case, we need to start widening our circle to shape Leo's head. Let's take a closer look at the row's formulas. In crochet, a C means single crochet stitch. In row 1, you make 6 single stitches. In row 2, INC means increase. You make 6 increases, and each increase is 2 stitches. So 6 times 2 equals 12 stitches for row 2. The number in the brackets tells you how many stitches you'll have by the end of the row. The formulas in row 1 and row 2 are relatively simple. However, more complex formulas exist. For example, let's examine row 3. The formula for row 3 reveals numbers within square brackets multiplied by another number, and the final number in brackets indicates the stitches you should have at the end of the row. What's inside the brackets represents a sequence, which in this case is a single stitch followed by an increase. This sequence is then multiplied by 6, meaning you repeat it 6 times to complete the row. And as a result, you will get 18 stitches in that row. Now let's start the second row. Put your hook in the loop and tighten it, and get your yarn in working position. Check the size of the loop on the hook. In row 2, we need to make 6 increases. Put your hook under the first stitch, the one that's not marked, and make sure you have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and pull the working yarn through that stitch. Form another loop on the hook and make sure it's the same size as the previous one. Then yarn over and finish off the stitch. Now we need to mark the beginning of the second row with the stitch marker, and we are going to continue marking the beginning of every round. Now let's finish off our increase. So to do that, we need to put another stitch into the same hole where we put the first one. Insert your hook under the same first V, not the one that's marked, but the same first one. Ensure you have 3 loops on the hook and yarn over. Pull the hook out, form another loop, and yarn over again to finish off the stitch. So these first 2 stitches made into the first stitch of the previous round are an increase. We're going to do the same with the second stitch and every other stitch in the round. Remove the stitch marker from the second stitch and put 2 single stitches into this stitch. Once you're done, your second increase is ready and you can move on to the third stitch. Remove the marker from the third stitch and put 2 single stitches into the stitch. By this time, we've made 3 increases and have 3 more to do. Once you're done with the last increase in round 2, pull on the hook to form a larger loop and remove the hook. Always make sure to count the stitches before moving on to the next round. To do that, start with a stitch marker that represents the first stitch of the round and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. At this point, you want to tighten the magic ring. To do that, turn your work around and find the yarn tail. Pinch your project and pull on the yarn tail to make sure that the hole in the center tightens. Now let's move on to row 3. In row 3, we are going to follow a simple pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase. So we're going to make a single stitch into the first stitch of the previous round, remove the stitch marker and insert the hook right under the same stitch where the stitch marker was, and complete the first single stitch. Make sure you always mark the very first stitch of every round. Then proceed to the next stitch. Crochet 2 single stitches into the next stitch to form an increase. Now repeat the pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase 5 more times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. Once you're done with the last increase for round 3, remove the hook and make sure to count the stitches. You should have 18 stitches in round 3. You can identify the right side of your crochet project by the presence of only vertical bars. The wrong side will feature both vertical and horizontal bars, forming a distinct texture. When counting stitches on the right side of your project, begin by locating the magic ring and the 6 single stitches. Next, you'll notice that the second row starts with a bump. Directly under this bump is the first stitch of the second round. This stitch corresponds to the hole under the V, similar to the hole under this V, but is the first stitch of the second round where we placed an increase. You'll find that 2 posts trace back into this hole, And as you follow along the round, you'll encounter 5 more instances where 2 posts trace back into the same hole, indicating the 6 increases. The first stitch of the third round is a single stitch, so there's just one post tracing back into that hole. In the second stitch, you'll find 2 posts tracing back into the hole. Then again, a single stitch and an increase. A single stitch and an increase. By examining the right side of your project, you can accurately count the stitches. This method is essential for identifying any errors. In row 4, we are going to follow a pattern of 2 single stitches followed by an increase. Once you remove the stitch marker, place the first single stitch into the first stitch of the previous row. Place the stitch marker in the first stitch to mark off the beginning of the round, and continue by creating another single stitch in the next stitch of the previous row. Now make an increase into the third stitch of the previous row. Continue making 2 single stitches followed by an increase till the end of the round. Once you're done, you should have 24 stitches in round 4. Before moving on to row 5, count the stitches to make sure you have 24. If you discover that you have too few or too many stitches in a row, first identify the mistake by counting the posts. Then pinch the last correct stitch that has to stay and carefully unravel all the stitches beyond it. Next, reinsert the hook into the small loop just above the stitch you've saved and proceed to complete the round correctly. In row 5, follow a sequence of 3 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat the sequence 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 30 stitches. Count the stitches before moving on to the next row. In row 6, crochet 30 single stitches. In row 7, follow a pattern of 4 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat the pattern 6 times. By the end of the round, you should have 36 stitches. Once you're done with the last increase, remove the hook and count the stitches starting with a stitch marker. You should have 36. In rows 8 and 9, crochet 36 single stitches each. To count the rows, start at the very center where the magic ring is. That's going to be row number 1, and count by the lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If you count on the side where the bump is, the result should stay the same. In row 10, the pattern to follow involves 4 single stitches followed by a decrease. A decrease is essentially the reverse of an increase, where 2 stitches are combined into one. This effectively reduces the total number of stitches in the row. Start by making the first single crochet into the first stitch of the previous round, and of course mark it off as the beginning. Make 3 more single stitches in a row. Now begin to decrease. Insert your hook through the next stitch, catching only the front bar. Do the same with the stitch that follows. This will leave you with 3 loops on your hook. Now yarn over and pull the hook through the first 2 loops. Finally, yarn over again and pull the hook through the last 2 loops to complete the decrease. Then find the next full stitch and start making the next 4 single stitches. Repeat the pattern of 4 single stitches followed by a decrease 5 more times. At the end of the row, you should have 30 stitches. Make sure to count the stitches, and in this round you should have exactly 30. In row 11, crochet 30 single stitches. In row 12, follow a pattern of 3 single stitches followed by a decrease. Repeat the pattern 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 24 stitches. Use only the front loops of the stitches to perform the decrease. Once you're done crocheting row 12, make sure to count the stitches. You should have exactly 24. Before we move on to row 13, we're going to put in the eyes. The eyes come with the silver pad that makes them shine, as well as the backing that you use to lock the eye in place. Once you put on that backing, it's going to be hard to take it off. Before we start putting the eyes in, let's figure out where to put them. Make sure the bump of the second row is turned to the right. Begin by counting rows from the center of the head down to identify the 6th and the 7th rows. The eyes will be placed between these rows. Select a hole in this area and insert your hook to widen it. Then grab a stitch marker and put it as a placeholder for the first eye. Double check to make sure that you've got the stitch marker exactly between rows 6 and 7. To position the second eye, count 5 holes from the first eye to the left. Then insert your hook into the 6th hole, which is the spot for the second eye. Widen the hole a little bit with your hook and put a stitch marker as a placeholder to mark the position of the second eye. Make sure you've got exactly 5 holes between the stitch markers. You can also check by the posts. You should have exactly 6 posts between the stitch markers. Now let's replace the first stitch marker with an actual eye. Use the stitch marker to widen the hole a little bit so that the eye goes through. Keep your thumb next to the hole that you've chosen not to lose it, and insert the first eye. Place the backing on the stem of the eye and press with your thumbs to click it shut. Now replace the second stitch marker with the second eye. Once you're done, there should be 3 stitches between the eyes. In row 13, make 12 decreases. This should leave you with 12 stitches in the round. Now is the perfect timing to start stuffing our toy. Get some of the stuffing and make sure it's nice and even, spread it out with your fingers where necessary. Only half fill the head with the stuffing to avoid it getting in the way during the next rounds of crocheting. Gradually, we will add more stuffing as we go. Make sure to put the stuffing in neatly so that none of it is sticking out. Now squish the head and check if it's still too soft. You can add a little more stuffing to it. Just be careful not to overfill. Once you're done stuffing the head, move on to the next row. In row 14, we're going to follow a pattern of 3 single stitches followed by an increase. We are going to repeat this pattern 3 times, and as a result, we should have 15 stitches. Make sure to count the stitches. You should have exactly 15. In row 15, follow a sequence of 4 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat this sequence 3 times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. Once you're done, make sure to count the stitches. You should have 18. In row 16, crochet 18 single stitches. In row 17, crochet 2 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat this pattern 6 times. By the end of the round, you should have 24 stitches. Make sure to count the stitches before you move on. You should have 24. In row 18, crochet 24 single stitches. In row 19, follow a pattern of 3 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat the pattern 6 times. By the end of the round, you should have 30 stitches. In row 20, crochet 30 single stitches. In row 21, follow a pattern of 3 single stitches followed by a decrease. Repeat this pattern 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 24 stitches. Don't forget to count the stitches. You should have 24. In row 22, follow a pattern of 2 single stitches followed by a decrease. Repeat this pattern 6 times. By the end of the round, you should have 18 stitches. You're very close to completing the body, so now is the best time to fully stuff it. Add the stuffing in small pieces, distributing it evenly between the head and the body. Remember not to overfill the toy so it remains nice and squishy and the neck is narrow. It's best to fill up the head first and only then continue filling up the body. Once you're done filling up the body, make sure that none of the stuffing is sticking out and move on to the next row. In row 23, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by a decrease. Repeat this pattern 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 12 stitches. In row 24, crochet 6 decreases. Make sure you've got exactly 6 stitches in the last round, and let's proceed to fasten off the body. Cut off the working yarn, leaving a 6 to 8 inch tail. Then pull the yarn tail through the last stitch completely. Now let's fasten off the body. To do that, grab the tapestry needle and thread it with the yarn tail from the body. Start by inserting the needle into the stitch where the stitch marker was, from the inside to the outside. Ensure that you're catching only the front bar of the stitch. Then pass the needle through every second stitch in the same manner. After threading through 3 stitches, pull the yarn tail to tighten the center. Then insert the needle into the stitch right beneath the yarn tail, guiding it out on the opposite side of the body. To hide the yarn tail, insert the needle into a stitch either directly below or above where it came out of. Avoid the creation of horizontal bars on the toy's body. Pass the needle through the entire body of your piece, exiting at any stitch you choose. To secure the yarn tail even more, create another fixing stitch. Insert the needle into a stitch either directly below or above the exit point, but ensure it's only one stitch away. This ensures that the yarn tail is finally anchored. Be careful not to pull the yarn tail too tight, as this can create dents. If a dent does form, gently slide the needle under the affected stitch and nudge it upward to restore its normal shape. Start making the leg with a magic ring. Then put 6 single stitches into the ring for row 1. Once you're done with row 1, tighten the magic ring. Remember not to over-tighten the ring to make it easier to crochet row 2. In row 2, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase, and repeat this pattern 3 times. At the end of the row, you should have 9 stitches. Keep marking the beginning of each round with a stitch marker. Once you've completed row 2, count the stitches to make sure you've got exactly 9 and move on to the next row. In rows 3 through 6, crochet 9 single stitches each. Once you're done with row 3, you might want to tighten up the magic ring to make sure it's completely closed. At this point, you can also hide the yarn tail inside the leg. By doing so, you will actually hide the yarn tail and stuff the leg. Then continue making rows 4, 5, and 6. Now we are ready to complete the leg. Remove the stitch marker and fold your work in half, aligning 3 pairs of stitches. Insert your hook through the first pair of stitches. Make sure you have 5 loops on the hook. Yarn over and make a single crochet stitch as usual. Do the same with the next 2 pairs of stitches. Once you're done, remove the hook and cut off the working yarn, leaving an 8-inch yarn tail. Pull the working yarn through the last stitch and the leg is done. Repeat these steps to make the second leg. Start making the arm with the magic ring. Then put 4 single stitches into the magic ring for row 1. Once you've put 4 single stitches into the ring, make sure to tighten the ring, but not all the way. This ensures that we can still see the first stitch of the round when we continue with round 2. In row 2, crochet 4 increases. This should leave you with 8 stitches in the round. In rows 3 through 5, crochet 8 single stitches each. Once you're done, remove the stitch marker and remove the hook. Then tighten the magic ring so that you don't have a hole at the very beginning of the arm. Hide the yarn tail inside the arm just like we did with the leg. Finish off the arm in the same way as you finished off the leg. Fold your work in half and match up 3 pairs of stitches. That's 1, 2, and 3. Grab the hook, insert it into the loop, and adjust the loop to fit the size of the hook. Put in your first single stitch for the seam through the first pair of stitches. Then make 2 more single stitches into the 2 pairs that are left. Once you're done, remove the hook and cut off the working yarn, leaving an 8-inch tail. Pull the yarn tail through the last stitch completely and repeat this process to make the second arm. Now let's crochet the outer part of the shell. Start with a magic ring and put 6 single stitches inside the ring for row 1. Once you're done, tighten the magic ring. In row 2, make 6 increases. By the end of the round, you should have 12 stitches. In row 3, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase. Repeat this pattern 6 times, and by the end of the round, you should have 18 stitches. Once you're done, count the stitches and move on to the next row. For row 4, follow a pattern of 2 single stitches followed by an increase. Repeat this pattern 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 24 stitches. Make sure to count the stitches once you're done. You should have 24. In row 5, make 24 single stitches. Alright, for row 6, you're gonna do 24 single crochet stitches, but a bit differently. You'll insert the hook only under the front loop of each stitch, instead of putting it under the whole stitch. This method will help create the shell's rim the way it's supposed to look. The front loop is the part of the stitch that's closest to you. Crochet each stitch like you usually do, but just through this front loop. As you crochet through the front loops only, you'll see the unused back loops remain inside or on the back side of your work, creating an edge or a rim. When you finish the row and unravel the last row with your fingers, this edge will stand out at a 90-degree angle. After finishing the row, remove the hook and gently curve the row so it stands at a 90-degree angle. Remove the stitch marker and cut off the working yarn, leaving an 8-inch tail. Pull the yarn tail completely through the last stitch. Now let's perform the invisible fasten off. Thread the yarn tail through the needle, skip the next stitch, and put the needle through the one after it and out on the other side. In this case, it doesn't matter if you do it from left to right or right to left. Next, insert the needle back into the last stitch made before cutting the yarn. Slide it between the two bars of that stitch. Guide the needle out on the wrong side of the project, and for extra security, you can also pass the needle through the horizontal bar of the stitch. This technique mimics the stitch pattern and creates an invisible fasten off. Now let's make the inner part of the shell. To do that, start with a magic ring and put 6 single stitches into it. For row 2, make 6 increases. By the end of row 2, you should have 12 stitches. In row 3, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase. Repeat the pattern 6 times, and by the end of the row you should have 18 stitches. After completing row 3, remove the hook and cut the working yarn. Make sure to leave a yarn tail that's at least 3 times longer than the circumference of the round piece you've worked on. This length will be sufficient to sew this part of the shell to the other part. Pull the yarn tail completely through the last stitch and perform an invisible fasten off. Remove the stitch marker and thread the yarn tail through the needle. Insert the needle under the stitch after the next one, from one side to the other. Then guide the needle through the last stitch of the round and through the horizontal bar behind it. Now the inner part of the shell is done. To create the belly, follow the same steps and process you used for the inner part of the shell. There's just one difference. For the belly, you'll need a longer yarn tail compared to the inner part of the shell. This extra length is necessary to connect the shell to the belly and create backpack-type straps. In row 1, make 6 single stitches. For row 2, perform 6 increases. In row 3, follow a pattern of a single stitch followed by an increase. Repeat the pattern 6 times. By the end of the row, you should have 18 stitches. After finishing row 3, remove the hook and pull out a long yarn tail. Because your yarn is folded in half, you'll have 2 strands to work with. Wrap these around the round piece, ensuring the length is about 3 times the circumference of the round. When you cut off the working yarn and pull it out of the last stitch completely, you will have a yarn tail that is as long as 6 circumferences of the ring. This length is sufficient to create the backpack type straps that will connect the belly to the shell. Complete the belly with an invisible fasten off, just like you've done with the shell and the inner part of it. Now let's assemble the shell. Grab the outer part of the shell and place all the yarn tails aside it. Then grab the smaller part of the shell, locate the yarn tail from the magic ring, and put this yarn tail inside the larger part of the shell too. Cover up all the yarn tails with the smaller part of the shell, and make sure that the right side of the smaller part is facing you. To sew both parts together, we will use the front loops of the rim of the inner part and the back loops left in the last row of the outer part. The outer part has 24 stitches and the inner part has 18. To align them, sew into every stitch of the inner part and skip every third or fourth stitch on the outer part. Begin by bringing the needle out on the right side of the inner part. Then insert it through the first stitch next to it, but only under the front loop. After that, bring the needle out and align the stitch with any stitch on the outer part of the shawl. Insert the needle under the back loop there. Continue by inserting the needle into the next loop on the outer shawl and then into the next stitch of the inner shawl. Make sure only to use the front loops of the stitches on the inner shawl. Now you're going to skip a stitch on the outer shawl. To do this, first grab the front loop of the inner part. Then, instead of sewing into the next loop of the outer part, you will skip over it. After skipping this one loop, proceed to sew through the next 3 pairs of stitches on both the inner and outer parts. Once you're done with these 3 pairs, you'll skip another stitch on the outer part with your next stitch. This method allows for even distribution and a neat finish. Once you've sewn around most of the shell and there's just a small opening left, it's time to stuff it. Fill the shell with the stuffing until it feels firm and holds its shape nicely. Make sure not to overfill the shell. It should look plump and well-shaped. Finally, sew both parts of the shell closed. Once you've sewn both parts of the shell together, gently pull on the yarn tail to tighten the seam. It's important not to tighten it too much to avoid distorting the shape. Now, to hide the yarn tail, weave it through the entire shell. Start at the stitch closest to where the yarn tail is and guide it all the way out of the shell. To do this, insert the needle through a stitch either in the row above or below, and only one stitch away from your current position. This approach helps ensure that you don't create any visible horizontal bars on the part, making the stitch appear seamless. Once the fixing stitch is done, cut off the working yarn right at its base. Then, gently push the cut end inside the shell. Now let's sew the legs to the body. Grab the legs and the tapestry needle. First, take the first leg and fit it between the 18th and 22nd row on the body. The seam of the leg should be somewhere around the middle on the side of the toy, or maybe even a little further to the back. Once you're happy with how the leg fits, secure it with a stitch marker. Turn your plushie to face you to make sure that the leg is fitted correctly. Ensure that the bottom of the body and the leg are level so your toy can sit properly. Now fit the second leg. Make sure the legs are symmetrical. You can turn your project upside down and use the first leg as a reference. Now fit the second leg. You can turn your project upside down to make sure that the leg is fitted symmetrically. Use the first leg as a reference. Ensure that the second leg is fitted between the same rows as the first one. Pin the second leg to the body once you're satisfied with its position. Thread the yarn tail from the first leg through the needle. Count 2 rows from the center of the body to the leg and insert the needle into the stitch that's directly beneath the yarn tail. Then guide it out of the body at the stitch beneath the last seam stitch of the leg. Guide the needle through the last stitch on the seam of the leg and remove the stitch marker. Make sure to put the needle through the seam of the leg from bottom to top. Then insert the needle into the same stitch on the body that it came out of. Guide the needle out at the back of the body. Leave the yarn tail at the back for now. We will finally secure the legs after fitting both of them, so that you can adjust the positioning of the legs if necessary without undoing much work. Repeat these steps with the second leg, using the first leg as a reference. Once you're done fitting the second leg, make sure they are symmetrical. After that, let's finish sewing the legs. Thread any yarn tail from the back through the needle, then insert the needle into any stitch in the row above or below, guiding it through the body into the middle stitch of the leg seam. Then put the needle back through the leg, this time exiting on the other side of the leg. To prevent the leg from flapping, insert the needle into a stitch in the row above on the leg and guide it out of the adjacent stitch. Make sure to sew through only one layer of the leg. Then insert the needle into the body, creating a similar one-stitch long stitch. Gently pull on the yarn tail to attach the leg closely to the body. Insert the needle into any adjacent stitch in the row above or below where the yarn tail is. Guide the needle out at any stitch on the body. Repeat the same steps for the second leg. You can continue using the same yarn tail to sew the second leg. If this yarn tail is not long enough, you can use any other yarn tail from the back. If you use the same yarn tail for sewing on the second leg, it's important to go back and add a fixing stitch for that leg's yarn tail. Without this, the corner of the leg or its last stitch may not stick properly to the body and could end up being loose. Leave all of the yarn tails at the back for now. Let's go ahead and sew on the arms. Take the arms and thread one of the arm's yarn tails. Position the first arm to your satisfaction, and then place the second arm symmetrically. The arm is intended to go between rows 14 and 17 at a slight angle. Set aside the arm without the needle. Then take the needle to sew on the first arm. Locate the stitch directly beneath the first stitch and find the stitch directly beneath the last stitch of the row. Next, insert the needle into the stitch right beneath the yarn tail and guide it out of the stitch in the row directly under the last stitch of your arm's seam. Then put the needle through the last stitch of the arm seam from bottom to top. Reinsert it into the same stitch it came out of and bring it up through the middle stitch on the arm. This part can be a bit tricky, so alternatively guide the needle out at the back to create a fixing stitch, then bring it over into the middle stitch of the arm. Insert the needle back through the arm into the adjacent stitch and guide it out at the back. Once satisfied with the position, proceed to fit the second arm. Repeat the sewing process for the second arm using the first one as a reference. Check how it aligns with the body and the leg, aiming for symmetry with the first arm. Once you're happy with the positioning of the arms and legs, it's time to hide the yarn tails. The goal is to have pairs of yarn tails exit from identical stitches at the back. You can either rethread a yarn tail by inserting the needle at its current exit point and guiding it to emerge alongside another yarn tail. Or create a fixing stitch and direct it to exit at the same point as another yarn tail. After aligning a pair of yarn tails to exit from the same stitch, tie them together with 2 knots. Trim the excess and tuck the knot inside the body for a neat finish. Repeat these steps with the second pair of yarn tails that you've got at the back. Then we'll move on to hiding the single yarn tail and attaching the shell. Hide the single yarn tail using a simple fixing stitch. Let's attach the belly and the shell to our plushie. Find the belly's center point on the toy. Grab the yarn tail from the magic ring and thread it through the needle. Insert the needle into the belly's center point and guide it out in the middle of the back. Check that the belly is positioned correctly. Then thread the needle through the shell, enter the center point of the bottom, and exit at the top center. Once both pieces are attached, check their positioning. Next, we'll create backpack straps. Thread the belly's yarn tail through the needle and start by stitching under 2 loops on the shell seam. Slightly tighten the strap that formed and bring the needle back to the front. Reinsert the needle into the belly at the point where the yarn tail emerged, ensuring that the strap is tight. Then insert the needle into the next stitch on the belly's rim from top to bottom, then into the following stitch from bottom to top. You'll need to go down 3 or 4 stitches before adding the second backpack strap. Ensure the last belly stitch brings the needle out at the back. Then guide the needle to the shell for the second strap. Sew through 2 loops on the shell, tighten the yarn, and bring the needle back through the same stitch on the belly. Create the third strap after skipping 2 or 3 stitches at the bottom of the belly. After the third strap, continue stitching along the belly's rim to the position for the fourth strap, taking 3 to 4 stitches. Ensure the needle exits at the belly's bottom for the fourth strap. Then create the strap on the shell seam and guide the needle back into the belly. To hide the yarn tail, fix the last strap with an additional stitch into the belly's rim. Guide the needle out at the back of the belly, then insert it into the body beneath the belly to conceal the tail. Use a hook to pull out the yarn tail that we used to fix the belly and the shell in place. Start by pulling the yarn tail out of the shell, and then put your hook under the belly and pull out the yarn tail out of the body completely. Thread the yarn tail in the needle and conceal it by inserting the needle somewhere under the belly. Guide the needle out where the other yarn tail is. Make any necessary adjustments, and once you're done, move on to hiding the yarn tails. To create the mouth, start by finding the ideal spot. Insert the needle from the beginning to the end of where you want the mouth to be. Check and adjust until you're satisfied with the mouth's appearance. Once you're happy, carefully tie the two yarn ends together. Be cautious not to over-tighten, as this can shrink the mouth. Securely knot the yarn and trim any excess. Gently tug the knot inside the head for a neat finish. Slip the needle under the yarn strand used for the mouth and gently spread it out to achieve the desired look. For the eye spots, take the skin-colored yarn and insert it into the head from the back, guiding it out of the position for the first eye spot, between rows 5 and 6, and 2 stitches away from the eye. Create a horizontal stitch for the first part of the eye spot, then guide the needle out directly beneath it. Make the second part of the eye spot in a similar manner, but 1 stitch further from the eye. Then create the third part of the eye spot in the next row. After finishing the eye spots on one side, bring the needle out on the opposite side at the start point for the next eye spot. Ensure that the first eye spots are evenly spaced and not too tight. Mimic the same process to create symmetrical eye spots on the other side. Use the same stitch counts from the eye as a guide for placement. If you make a mistake, simply reposition the yarn tail from one stitch to another. Complete the second eye spot and bring the needle out at the back of the head where the other yarn tail is. Hide the yarn tails in a usual manner. And finally, your plushie is complete. I hope you enjoyed the project. Please don't forget to take a picture of your toy and share it with us. Thank you, and bye for now.